Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for Pollinator Field Journals with the BeeChicas. You can follow along and see the directions and videos on beechicas.com/how-to. I am Kathy Lane, Boulder Public Library's Programs, Events, and Outreach Coordinator. Celine Cooper's behind the scenes running the live stream. And before we begin, I want to go over some housekeeping. So we are with the BeeChicas, and this is part of our Seed to Table programs, which you'll find on the library's YouTube channel after today. So if you missed some of the things today, you can join us again with the recording. All of our online events are an extension of library services. Library conduct policies apply in our online space, and the link is in the description below. If you enjoy this presentation, we have more upcoming virtual programs. Please visit the boulderlibrary.org website for the full virtual events calendar. This event is part of Seed to Table events focusing on sustainable living with gardening, cooking, and BeeChica programs. And I would like to recognize and thank our sponsors who make the Seed to Table and programs available. So the Boulder Library Foundation sponsors 90% of all library programs. Finally, if at any time during this event you would like to post your questions, please log into Google, YouTube, or Facebook accounts. Otherwise, you can just join along without having to sign in. We will address your questions during Q&A portions of the event. And the Boulder Public Library and City of Boulder have been working with the BeeChicas since 2015 for Seed to Table workshops, the Bee Boulder Festival, Pollinator Appreciation Month, and the BeeChicas take care of the library hives on the roof. So I would like to introduce our scientists, artists, gardeners, and beekeepers. We have Tracy, Teresa, Deborah, and Cynthia. BeeChicas, thank you so much for adapting the in-person workshop you would have been offering in person for a virtual experience.
We're so happy to be here with everybody. Thank you for joining us. As Kathy mentioned, we've been working with the library since 2015. We are pollinator educators and advocates. We visit elementary school classrooms to teach children about the importance of pollinators and how they can support them in their daily lives. We have hives on the rooftop of the Boulder Public Library, thanks to the Boulder Library Foundation. And we speak about town and visit different groups and organizations to help spread the word about the importance of pollinators. And we're super happy to be here with you today to talk about a fun activity that Tracy's created.
Okay, I was muted there. So thanks for joining us. I hope that you can follow along with the kit that we had available at the Boulder Public Library. If you don't have a kit, you're still going to learn a lot about bees, wasps, flies, all pollinators that are going to visit your flowers in your garden. But something that always blows our mind and just is amazing to us is that there are more species of bees than birds, mammals, and amphibians combined. And if you combine all the species of bees and all the species of wasps, it's more than plants. So Colorado has about 1,000 different species of bees that are native to Colorado. But one of them that's our favorite and most, I guess, most valuable to us is the European honeybee, and that is not native at all to North America, and it was brought over with European settlers in the 1600s. So Boulder County has about 600 different species of bees, and only 23 of these are bumblebees. But look at the variety of colors and shapes that you see here. Some of them you may not recognize, like this one here, as a bee. It looks to me like a wasp, but now I know better, and we're going to teach you how to tell the difference. So here's just a picture of all the different species, or many of the different species of bees, showing various sizes. This one here is about 2 millimeters, I believe. It's called the Perdita. It's the smallest bee. And here's our largest carpenter bee. And there's a huge difference. So this one is smaller than an ant, but it is a bee. So what really is a bee? How can, what distinguishes a bee from a wasp? Well, about 150 million years ago, wasps started to use pollen as a protein source. So that's when flowers were first popping up, and stopped eating meat. So wasps eat meat. That's their protein source, and bees use pollen. So they're fuzzy relatives of wasps that feed pollen to their offspring, but they're much friendlier and nicer. So here's the slide that shows the biggest difference between bees and wasps. And when we're in person, we usually ask our patrons, what do you notice that's different? And somebody usually notices how hairy on the right these bees are. So especially their legs on this bumblebee right here compared to these wasps. The wasps have spikes on their legs meant to hold their prey, but no like pollen carrying like mechanisms or features. They might have a little hair on their head like this yellow jacket. And this is the one that is responsible for most of the stinging. Yellow jackets are responsible for 95% of stings and people think it's a honeybee or a bee, but it's usually a wasp. So here's a couple other wasps to show you. Like a mud dauber makes some cool nests around our kitchen window right now, and I've been watching her all summer make nests. Paper wasp is really beneficial in your garden, and so is the mud dauber. And then here's our western yellow jacket that can be a bit of a nuisance, but wasps in general are beneficial to your garden. So they control your slugs and larval stage of like of some what you might think is garden pests. So here's flies that mimic bees. They do that for protection because they look like they might sting you, but they cannot sting. And you'll notice they look different than bees to us that are trained because their eyes are big and bulgy and they touch at the top of their head, which is different than a bee. They also have 2 wings instead of 4. So these are beneficial to your garden flies, especially because there's just so many numbers of flies. You probably have seen these flies hovering over your flowers, and they do a great job of pollinating just because they're so numerous. And then moths that try to mimic bees, these have, they also have 4 wings on them, and they're very hairy. They have giant antennae, which is different than a bee. And so why do you think bees are important? They are responsible for about 1/3 of our food supply. And that's because they do the job of pollinating our fruits, vegetables, and some grains. What you see in this picture here would disappear. And most importantly, these fruits and vegetables require insect pollination and buzz pollination. Blueberries actually require vibrations to release pollen, so they can't even be human pollinated. This is what's happening in China, where we don't have as many of our honeybees in China, so they're having to use Q-tips and moving from flower to pollinate. So all of these would disappear. Pumpkins for Halloween without our bees. So here are some of the bees that might find in your backyard. I'm just going to go quickly through these so you can see how differently they each look and some of their behaviors. The bumblebees are probably the cutest of all the bees. They're extremely fuzzy, they're larger, and as I said before, there are 23 species. These are great at pollinating tomatoes and blueberries that require that buzz vibration pollination for the flower to release its pollen. And Cynthia Chica will talk a bit about flowers and just after these bees. Mason bees, they use mud to plug their nest cavities. There's a bunch of different species in Colorado. You'll find these in our native bee hotel at the Boulder Public Library. So there's some of these mud plugs, and they won't emerge till they won't come out until next spring. So this is a blue orchard mason bee up close. You can see the extra eyes on the top of her head. So she's blue, black. Leaf cutter bee. These leave nice little perfect holes in your leaves in your garden, and I find these more attractive than the flowers, and often collect these bundles of leaves to put on our table. But they also will nest in the bee house at the Boulder Public Library, or cavity straws that you might put in your backyard. They're cavity nesters. And they're still actually filling their nests now. So here's a carder bee on a lamb's ear plant, and you can see her nest, and she's pulled all the fuzz off the leaves of the plant to plug her nest. And then a sweat bee. These you'll find in open areas on your yard, in dirt areas. So it's nice to leave areas unmulched because they'll nest in bare dirt. And they're really good pollinators of brassicas, strawberries, and native plants, of course. And here's a green sweat bee. It's beautiful, and you might not think it was a bee until now. Again, they're ground nesters. So the squash bees, here's a male that's sleeping in a flower, waiting for the flower to open in the morning, so it could be the first to meet a female. The females nest in the ground. Let's see, there's more squash and gourd bees. So this is, if you did get a kit from the Boulder Library, there's a field guide in there to tell whether it's a bee, is it a native bee, or a honeybee, or a wasp, or a fly. And the main difference when you're out in your garden observing what's coming to your flowers is to look at how hairy the insect is. So very hairy, both of these. And then going back here, flies have really short antennae, big bulgy eyes on the top of their head. Wasps, look at their hair, their legs, and they'll be maybe with spikes on them, or no hairs visible on their legs, especially. And let's see, they also have 4 wings, just like a honeybee. But look closely at these photos, and you can see just the main differences between our bees and our wasps and flies. So the honeybee, you're going to see a lot of those in your garden if you're nearby a beehive. And these are more torpedo-shaped abdomens. The colorations can be dark, almost black, to golden. So there's different races of bees. There's an Italian that's bright yellow stripes on it, and then some of our Northern European carnelian are very black stripes on them. So different from some of our native bees. There's many different ways that bees carry pollen on their body, native bees, some under their belly, some on their legs. Honeybees, everybody might have heard that they have pollen pockets on the back of on their back legs. So those are things to look for, and you'll know they're a bee if they're carrying pollen. So I hope that helps you understand what might be visiting your garden. And we're going to go to questions now.
Hi, yeah, we have a question. When is the best time to refresh the nesting straws and or hollow stems or bamboo in a native bee house? Like what time of year and how do you do it?
Oh, I can jump in and answer that question about refreshing your straws. So in Colorado, it's a dry climate. We have not had the issues of chalk brood, it's called. Like it's almost like mold in those nesting tubes. So the bees need study at the CU Museum of Natural History. They actually have not, Virginia Scott has not refreshed any of her native bee houses in the last 7 years that the program's been running. But if you lived on the East Coast, it would be a little different. So I hope any other BeeChicas want to add to that?
I'll add a little something. I actually had, from Virginia's study, a block that split. And so it had a few nesting plugs on one side, but it was really falling apart. So I got a large, like a 5-gallon landscape bucket if you bought a big plant, and drilled a little hole at the bottom of it so that there was daylight. And then in early March, I talked to Virginia about how to do this. I stuck the native bee block under the bucket. And so that way, any of those early pollinators that emerged could get out of the bucket because they would fly towards the light, but they couldn't go back to nest. So I had a brand new nesting block, beautifully set up right where the old one was. And I stuck the old nesting block under the bucket. And I actually left it there all summer because I had a variety of plugs. And
it looks like Deborah froze. Is that right?
I think
Yeah, I think you're right.
that. So over the course of the summer, all the different types of bees emerged one by one as they naturally came out. And so she left the bucket there all summer long so she could let that process naturally happen.
And Deborah, did all of the bees emerge when you left it under the bucket? Did you notice the percentage?
yes, they all, I mean, I had 2 plugs that looked like they'd been drilled into by a predator. So
Yeah,
those
like a parasitic wasp or something
yeah,
like that?
but the rest all emerged. It was super successful. So that's a good tip for nesting blocks when you have blocks and no straws.
But there is also a dust mite that that can be an issue, and monodontia, a little parasitic wasp. Tom Theobald raises mason bees, and he'll get holes drilled into the side of his paper tubes where they enter. So if your block split, or if you notice like damaged tubes, it's definitely a good idea to switch them out. But I actually do like the practice of using paper straws that you can take out and replace just to prevent disease. But just so you know that at least Virginia Scott does leave her old boxes up and hasn't noticed like disease amongst those blocks. And if you have like a humongous hotel, I think you'd have more disease issues. But if they're smaller, nesting blocks, they're less likely to be preyed upon, or less likely for disease as well to spread. What do you?
Can I raise my hand?
Yeah,
There's no raise hand feature that I can find. Have any of the other BeeChicas taken those straws out in the winter and put them into a paper bag in the refrigerator and put it into the vegetable drawer? Because I think Tom Theobald has recommended that, and then keeping them there all winter and then putting them back into the nesting block or the native bee house in the spring, like by mid February or beginning of March. Has that ever happened? Have you ever done any of that?
I haven't. No.
I haven't done that. I think that's really good practice, though, if you're trying to raise a lot of mason bees to pollinate your orchard and you have a large scale operation. They definitely maintain them and take them out every fall and remove the little individual cocoons, protect those over the winter, and then let those emerge again in the spring. And there's different techniques. You can either take the entire straw or you can take individual cocoons.
And you could probably find that information on the internet for more exact information, wouldn't you think?
Definitely.
And if you're concerned about some kind of disease or what you were describing, would you also need to replace the outside container if it was wood? Whatever the box is that's holding all the straws?
Oh,
I don't think
no.
if it's not moldy or doesn't show signs of splitting open like Deborah's did, and it's still a good enclosure, then it's totally fine.
Great, thank
There's
you.
a lot on thanks. Yeah, and there's a lot more on our website. There's also links to Xerces, the Invertebrate Society. Xerces.org has how to maintain native bee houses, but it's more specific to the East Coast, I've noticed.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions? Maybe not. I have a comment.
I think that's covered it for now.
Okay, I have a comment about Tracy's presentation. I noticed a lot of flies and the moths are really great food for birds. So when you're attracting pollinators with your plantings, you're also attracting moths and flies and other insects. And we love bugs. We're all beekeepers, we love bees. We just generally love bugs because they all are functional in the ecosystem. And even hummingbirds eat bugs and feed them to their young. They're great pollinators, you know, and they go into the flowers and get nectar, but they also eat a large amount of bugs when they're nesting.
Excellent point.
That's it.
It's what we go for, the whole picture, the whole ecology. And speaking of the whole ecology, I'll talk a little bit about the flowers that your pollinators will be visiting in your garden or on your window box, or where, even if you have just a very small space on a patio, you can feed the pollinators with these flowers. So in observing, which is what we're trying to get you guys to focus on today with the pollinator journals, in observing pollinators, you also need to observe the plants so that you can provide the right source. If you want a hummingbird, for instance, to come into your yard, you should plant plants that are suited for that hummingbird. And with the very long beaks that the hummingbirds have, what would you think they would go to? A tubular flower, like the first one we see there. They will be able to reach down to that really yummy nectary way in the bottom of the flower and get some good nectar. So there's so many different flower shapes out there, but we are just going to highlight a few of the basic ones. A radial, which is like your daisy that has a center and leaves going out in a radial pattern, and that will attract a lot of butterflies and bees. It's a beautiful landing pad for them to come to. The domed flowers, which we don't really have a dome here, but a dome would be, I'll show you one in a minute, like a scabiosa or something that's like an allium or something. It's really suited for the bees, and also hummingbirds that can go and hover in the air and get their beaks up into those things. And we talked about the tubulars, like the trumpet vines. There's also many moths that are good pollinators, like the sphinx moths, that also have long proboscis that they can roll out. And if anybody has read about Darwin's theory of evolution, he theorized that every single plant out there had a specific pollinator that it evolved with. And some scientists thought they were going to prove him wrong because there was such a very long moth with a long proboscis, and they said there's not going to be a flower with anything that long. But then maybe just 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, that flower was discovered in the fossil record. So it was proven true that there was a pollinator that matched the very longest tubes that they had. So that's interesting. We can go on to the next slide, which just shows some really beautiful pictures of that hummingbird going all the way down into the trumpet vine, and then a radial flower with a green sweat bee on it, and then the scabiosa, which is a nice landing pad. It's a domed, and some of them cross over. They can kind of be more than one, but some people would call this radial or composite because it's made of a lot of little teeny tiny flowers. And so the next one will show a little quiz for you, and you can put your answer in the chat, or you can just think of it yourself. What do you think this is? This is Clematis paniculata, which is the fall autumn clematis that blooms right now. And I would say that's a radial. It has pollen in the middle and bracts or petals going out to the sides. Okay, next slide. And here are some other ones you can guess. The sunflower is a beautiful radial flower on the right, yep. And then guess what that flower is on the left? That is just a common carrot that's called an umbel. And that's just letting a few of your carrots bloom in or stay in the ground and then bloom. If you leave carrots and don't harvest them this fall right now, then next spring, some of them, they'll still stay there. The root is the orange part of the carrot, and it'll stay underground and it'll sprout again in the spring. It wouldn't be delicious to eat after it sprouts because it'll taste more woody, but it's wonderful forage for all kinds of native bees. And it's a composite umbel flower made up of so many, probably hundreds of teeny tiny little flowers. And you will be so surprised at the teeny tiniest little bees that come to those flowers, and an abundance of all sorts. Butterflies love them. They love to land on them. Wasps, the biggest wasps to the tiniest little bees will all be there. So if you want to observe pollinators, I highly recommend you could plant some carrots right now and they'll bloom next spring as well, as soon as the frost has passed. And this down in the right-hand corner is a sweet pea. And that's what they call an irregular shaped flower. And it kind of has a lever that opens and closes. So that's really perfect for the bumblebees or the heavier bee species, because they land on that lower lip and it opens up, and then it opens up the nectary and they can reach in there, and then they fly away and it closes back up. So this brings us to the point of the next slide, which, as I said earlier, plants and insects evolved together way, way, way back in the day. And some are still highly, highly specialized, like the squash bee that Tracy mentioned earlier is a specialist on squash flowers. And you can find these bees, especially the males, will stay in the squash flower, which closes up around noon or so every day. And the male bee just sleeps in there. And then when it opens up again in the morning, it's right there ready for the females who are coming to pollinate that blossom. But they're also generalists. There are many native bees that are generalists, and also the honeybee is a really common generalist that will look across your field and just pollinate the heck out of whatever is there. They like to go to one flower source. Individual bees or groups of bees from hives will visit one source until that source has been depleted. But different groups will go to different types of flowers. And it's really important for a honeybee to have all sorts of different types of pollen, for just like we would hope for a well-balanced diet for our children, so do the bees. And the pollen is their protein source, as Tracy said. And they need to pack in all different colors. So as my grandmother always said, eat a colorful plate and you'll be a healthy person. Same goes for the bees. And we just wanted to always get a little plug in. You might be wondering what you can do for the bees and the pollinators. It is Pollinator Appreciation Month. Happy Pollinator Appreciation Month, everyone. The month of September every year is Pollinator Appreciation Month in the city of Boulder. And it's a good time to refresh your knowledge about pollinators and spread your knowledge around to others. You've already done half of that. Number one, you can check that off your list. You're learning about pollinators right now, and now you can go and share with others. You can provide food for the pollinators, planting flowers. Planting a few natives is so important in your garden. It will just enhance the amount of food and habitat for all kinds of bugs. And as Teresa said, it really helps the ecology of your area, but also the whole world. So that's important. And you need to provide food, and that's wonderful, but you won't keep the pollinators around unless you also provide habitat, which comes in the form of bare dirt, which is nesting ground for 70% of our native bees, and nesting cavities. By that, I mean you can put up your own little bee block. You can go to our website and find out how to make your own native bee house very simply. And for the cavity nesters, which is 30% of our native bees. And you also want to be really cognizant about planting host plants. A host plant is a plant that is delicious and provides food and forage for the larval stage of butterflies, for example. If you, as just a really easy example, if you don't have Asclepias in your yard, you will not be able to have monarch butterflies because that is their sole, they are specialists, as we just learned, on Asclepias varieties, our butterfly weed. And so if you want to attract that particular butterfly, you have to plant that host plant so the caterpillars can find food and a place to lay eggs for the next stage of the butterfly. So I think we're ready for the next slide. And any questions if anyone has?
Yes, we've got a few questions. One of the pictures that you were showing, Cynthia, looked like a wildflower I know as Queen Anne's lace. Are they related?
Oh, that was the carrot. Yes, carrots are related to Queen Anne's lace, but it's not a Queen Anne's lace. It's slightly different. You can tell by the foliage is a little bit different, but it looks an awful lot like that. So great observation. You're ready for your journal.
And what are there specific flowers that native bees prefer for their food?
Generally, the native bees really do prefer native plants. These are all native plants in this slide. That's prairie wine cups, and that is that's a really good pollen plant actually for many species of bees, and I've seen butterflies heading to that as well. And then if you see that bright yellow spot sort of in the middle rear, that is goldenrod. That's a wonderful late season pollinator plant that just every pollinator, soldier beetles, butterflies, so many different kinds of bees. It's also a native. And you'll find that the native plants are generally really excellent host plants as well. So I would say put a few natives in your garden.
Great.
Cyn, don't we have an excellent native plant resource on our website as well?
Yes, we do. Under classes and resources, you can find, have to scroll down a little ways on that page. Oh, here it is. Thanks, Tracy. And you can see BeeChicas' favorite native plants. I think, oh, it's higher up there. It was up there. Well, Xerces Society also has lots of wonderful plant lists for your specific region. But if you want to know about Boulder specifically, you can click on the BeeChicas favorites. There it is, down right there. And that'll take you to ours, in our experience in our very own backyards. So, yeah.
Nice.
And nice that we list the sources. So if you are local in Boulder, we have a couple of options of safe nurseries to go to, because one of the things you have to be careful about is that the plants you're purchasing to put in your pollinator gardens are neonicotinoid free. And we have a resource list on the website that shows you where you can go to get safe plants. Not all the big box or commercial nurseries have pesticide-free plants. They actually grow them with pesticides in the soil. So you do need to be careful about where you buy your plants and what you're putting in your garden from the very, very start.
Great. We have a few more questions. Do we have time right now, or do you want to save them till the end? Okay.
Oh, now
So
I think
a question
now is
from a
fine.
local family is, is it better to put out the nesting blocks in the spring, or is there still time this fall to put them out?
You could put
And
them
I think
fall. You probably won't get many bees. You may get like one or two different varieties that could still be nesting. It's kind of late in the season. You could put it up and have it ready if it has a good shield on the top. or best is to put it out in March next year. Mid-March, I think, is probably the best time to put it out. You want to have it there in advance of the first emerging bees, which are the blue orchard bees in our mason bees in our area. And it may take a year for them to actually find it. If you put it out and you don't get bees the first year, don't get discouraged, because they'll find it in the next years.
And is it helpful to put the nesting? Oh, go ahead, Deborah.
I was going to say, I think when you put them out, you want to avoid the deep shade. I notice I have multiple nesting blocks, and in my garden, the ones that are facing with their face either in the morning light or due south are much more populated than the nesting blocks that are in a shadier location. And that's one of the things we learned when we were all part of the citizen science study through CU. We were given blocks and told how to orient them in the garden and how far off the ground to hang them as a test to see what the bees preferred. And it was very interesting to get the feedback from that. So you want to have the face warming up in the day.
And didn't you have one nest about 2 feet off the ground, Deborah? You were given that instruction, and that nest filled up. But I found the ones but I think 4 to 5 feet is what I would say, and facing the south or the southeast.
Yeah, and I would add, that was part of the study, is that they found different species of bees like different orientations and different heights. And some of the ones that were in the shade facing the wrong way didn't get the blue orchard mason bees, but they did get the aphid wasps later in the year. And so it was really interesting what different species prefer. So if you've got room, put a bunch of small houses all over your yard, all different places, and you'll collect more and more bees to observe for your pollinator journals.
Thank you. And Cynthia, you talked about that in a previous workshop that we did about native bee houses. And one of the things I remember is we were looking at some of the store-bought bee houses and how the roof wasn't very deep. Can you talk about, like, if you have a store-bought bee house, like what additional kind of either weather or shade cover you would add to it?
Yeah, you should definitely cover it with something for shade. That's such a good point, as well as because in the heat of the summer, especially in your container, you don't want to boil those little bees. You want them to be shaded a little bit, and you can just use a piece of cardboard. You may have to refresh that after the winter, and you can make it as big as you want, and that's a really simple way to give some extra protection to your.
And the depth of the cavities should be at least 6 inches deep, so that they have male and female eggs and bees being born. 6 to 8.
And that workshop that Kathy was referring to, the BeeChicas did a native bee workshop. It is available on YouTube. Is that right, Kathy? On the Seed to Table YouTube videos?
It is, yes. I'll put Celine, can you put a link to that, to the Seed to Table playlist for us? Thank you. And one last question while we're on this topic. Family asks, does providing a home for these mason bees, will that unintentionally hurt other bee populations, like throw off your yard's ecological balance?
Very good question. You guys are really smart. Thanks for joining us today. That's a really thoughtful question, but I think that providing habitat for bees is so very important, and they will be able to compete out there as long as you have enough forage. Some native bees can only fly very short distances, while honeybees can fly very long distances to find nectar sources. So it's all about creating a rich, whole ecosystem in your outdoor space. And I think you're only doing a good thing to try and attract, give more sites for
great
bees.
Yeah, and actually to put that in perspective, Cynthia, how far can the little Perdita bee fly compared to the honeybee?
Yeah, I think it's something like 50 yards or 100 yards is all it can fly. Like the length of a football field
Football.
as long as it would ever fly in its lifetime.
So it's good to have food around the nesting block.
Yes,
Um,
very important.
do we
that
have time?
that would be the Perdita bee, this little green sweat bee. And the honeybee can fly, what, 3 miles? But probably only 1 or 2 miles for forage.
Okay.
I would think.
Do we have time for 2 more questions that popped up from YouTube?
Sure. Yeah.
So the question is, what is the common name for the plant that monarch larvae love?
Milkweed.
Oh. Mhm.
Yes.
Milkweed, but
Yeah.
it's really important. I'll say we're right on the edge of the monarch butterfly migration, so we really aren't in the midst of the migration. But what I would say is important to plant the right milkweed that is native to our area. And there's Asclepias incarnata, Asclepias tuberosa, and what's the third one, Teresa?
Speciosa.
Speciosa, yeah. So those are the 3 types that you should plant here. And we encourage you to try and learn the Latin names, because if you just go and say, I want milkweed, you could be getting anything from, something that's not even close to milkweed to, a non-native species. So that's why we try to use the Latin names for correct identification.
Great, thank you.
But I think if you went to thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if you went to Harlequin's, that they would know what is a native milkweed plant.
Definitely, yeah. You can trust if you have a nursery you can trust, then you can rely on them.
Great. So here's another question that's referring back to what you said earlier. In the journal or in the talk, it was stated that flowering plants should be provided all year round. Here in Colorado, how do we do that? How do we encourage that for the winter, especially like the season? Could you clarify when it's critical to have flowering plants, your early and late bloomers that you referred to?
Excellent question. You are so right. We cannot grow and provide habitat for insects year round. We only have our growing season from about February, starting with a few little flowering things through till the end of October, whenever we have a extended hard frost. So we cannot provide nectar and flowers the whole year, but we can provide habitat the whole year. And insects live under leaves, and they burrow into the dirt in the winter and live under piles of branches and things. So that's why we want you to leave that kind of habitat in your garden throughout the winter to protect the larval stages and the hibernating stages of all the bees and other pollinators. Great question.
Yeah, let me say that in January, end of January and all of February, I have Helleborus orientalis, or Lenten rose, that blooms. And when when it's above 50 degrees, bees come out of their hives for elimination flights, and they find that pollen, and it's an early source, along with crocus and some of the other bulbs. And leave your dandelions. That's a very early source of nectar and pollen. We love dandelions.
Yeah, she was talking about the honeybees that come out of their beehives all winter long. Great point.
Thank you. All right, Chicas, I think we can continue on. Viewers, please continue to ask your questions, and we will have time to answer them at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to show a video on how to sew your field journal. So again, if you don't have these materials at home, you can actually take a regular letter size paper and cut it in half and make a stack, and then find maybe a cardstock, a thicker cover material, maybe upcycling a book that you don't use anymore for a cover, and follow along that way. But if you, there are still kits available at the Boulder Public Library if you haven't picked yours up already.
Welcome to Making Your Own Pollinator Field Journal. This is Tracy Bellhumer, and I'm one of the 4 BeeChicas, and I'm going to show you how to find your Field Journal using a very old stitch called the pamphlet stitch. So you should have in your kit a text block, and you're going to fold that in half and crease it along the spine. It's already collated in the order that we wanted you to use your book or have it. And then you're going to need the cover, some leather lace, a pencil is helpful to push to help with the binding, and your field guide. So you're going to first start in the center of your text block. And so I'm going to teach you some book terms. So this is a text block, and these are our covers. And we're going to go through the spine starting in the center hole. And we're going to leave about an inch or two. And the lace has been cut for you to a point, so you can make it more pointy if you need to. So I'm holding this down because the holes are quite large and I didn't want to pull it through. So I've started in the center and I've come out of the center, and I'm going to go in the top hole. And it might help to use a pencil to line up the holes. And holding this so I didn't pull it through this time. And then I'm going to go back through the center. And here's where you can see it is a figure 8 that we're going to do in the binding. So you're going to use the pencil to help you move the leather aside. And we go through the center hole 3 times. So there are no knots. It's all pressure fit. Through the center and tighten. And now you've come back out through the center and you're going to go in the bottom hole. And we're almost completed the figure 8. If we go through the center again, that completes it. So using your pencil or something and all to push aside the leather, you can get your lace through. I'm holding the center again, so this first piece, so it doesn't pop out. Okay, and that is it. So you might want to put a heavy book on it overnight to help crease this. And here's my cover. And don't forget, there's a little pocket here to put your field guide. And this is so you can tell the difference between a native bee, a honeybee, which is distinctly different than our North American native bees, and then a wasp or a fly. And all of these are pollinators. So the BeeChicas hope that you bring this journal to a meadow, a garden, or your backyard where you can sit and observe who visits. The abundance and diversity of pollinators who visit your flowers. They aren't just bees, though bees are the most important pollinators. Pollinators can be birds, beetles, bats, moths, flies, or wasps. So watch the flowers and see what comes. Sincerely, the BeeChicas. And to close it, just wrap it around a couple times and thread it around. Like so. Hello.
I'm really sorry for the birds in the background. I did not know that they were quite so loud until I heard that recording. So apologize for that. So we have something else to share with you that you can find on our website if you didn't pick up a kit, and it is a native bee nesting book. And if you look on our website under the how-to, you'll find a downloadable booklet, a zine like this, and a video on how to fold it. And if you did have your kits, you would have had this as well. And it's something you can fold and then read along with your family. It's got some photos of bees that nest in cavities and wasps that will nest in your nesting blocks that you might hang in your yard. So any questions?
Tracy, what is a zine? You said
a zine is a little miniature booklet. I guess it's short for magazine, and it's just a fun way to share information. So we hope to share it with you guys in this workshop, and you can download it on our BeeChicas.com website. And Cynthia's holding hers up there. finished folding. It's nice because the spine is closed and it's just one photocopy on one side of 8.5 by 11. So if you have any questions for us, we would love to answer them.
So we've got, where would we find a list of local native bees and when they hatch and lay eggs? I think that's related to the other question about like, when do we need food out for the pollinators?
Oh, like the seasonal bees or when they're active. That's a good question. And I don't have, we don't have something like that on our website, but we can tell you that mason bees are early pollinating fruit trees, and they're only active for about a month. Would you guys say in the spring? Maybe 6 weeks or so.
I think it's 6 weeks. Do you guys think the Bees Needs website is still active, the CU study? Because that would be an excellent resource for native local bees and more information about the time of the season that they emerge and how long they live. Because as we've mentioned before, different bees live for different periods of time. Some only live 6 weeks and some live 12 weeks. And Cynthia is holding up a favorite book of all of ours, Bees in Your Backyard, which is an excellent resource. Is that Colorado specific?
No.
No.
This one is, but there's not very many on here.
Yeah. Zine definitely is. And the beesneeds.org, I think.
It's right there.
So beesneeds.colorado.edu.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Are you putting that in the chat?
It's here on the screen.
Oh, perfect. Right in front of me.
Yeah, it looks like
I'm looking at you and not the screen.
And they have a section specifically about native bees.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's a good resource.
Yeah.
Super. So another question is, are there specific flowers that, did I ask that already? Flowers that native bees prefer? Sorry. Are there other bees in Colorado that make honey besides honeybees?
Not in large volumes. So bumblebees make honey seasonally. They're a eusocial species. They're only in a colony for the growing season. Right now, starting now, you'll see queens for next year looking around for wintering sites under the leaves in your backyard, holes in the ground to hibernate for winter. But they do make honey in small wax pots where they'll raise their young in these wax pots. They'll have pots of honey and they'll have pots of pollen. It's pretty interesting to look inside a bumblebee hive because it's so different than our honeybee hive.
And will you be talking about best ways for us to observe native bees in this workshop? Yeah,
that's really the goal of this workshop, is to get you to sit in a patch of flowers and observe what comes. And so Teresa has one of the field journals, and she'll talk about how you might fill it out.
Great.
Yeah, this is actually Cynthia Chicas. She made it. And she did a wonderful job of, here's the first page. You can see it. And then there's an observation area, but look at the beautiful drawings she did right here of sunflowers and bees. And you can draw realistic bees, or you could draw, fun bees that you've observed. And this has the date in your pollinator journal, the weather, the place that you observed the pollinator, what kind of pollinator it could be. It could be a butterfly, it could be a hummingbird, it could be a native bee or a honeybee. And then the flowers that you saw the bee on. And then you just write down and spend some time watching that bee and where it would go and writing about the day. This is kind of a journal. And I did a little drawing here earlier of what you could observe. And here's a Here's a tubular flower, kind of a goofy tubular flower. But as you remember, only a bee or a hummingbird would be able to, a bee with a long proboscis or maybe a sphinx moth would be able to get into that tubular flower. And then sunflowers and echinacea would be a radial type of cone flower. And here's a little tiny green swept bee at the top, and they're the ones that pollinate strawberries and some of the brassicas. That's right. So these are just little drawings, little types of drawings that you could sit and observe and put in your field journal.
Yeah, there's we actually have a table that you can put the number of visitors to flowers and make a tick for every honeybee that comes to the patch of flowers or native bee. And it's a good way to evaluate how good your pollinator patch is or how attractive it is to pollinators. So if you have a lot of honeybees visiting your patch of flowers, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have an amazing pollinator patch. It's good, but it might mean that you just have the patch close to a beehive right nearby. But if you have a lot of native bees that visit your patch of flowers in your yard, then you really do have a good pollinator patch. Wouldn't you agree, Cynthia?
Yes, I would agree. And I would also add, look for the other pollinators as well. Look for hummingbirds and butterflies and
wasps. Yeah.
In your journal, you could note the colors, the size, the shape of the flower and the bee or the butterfly or whatever you're doing, because you might want to refer to that later.
And if you are observing the pollinator in your own garden, you can pick the flowers and press them. You can press them between wax paper and put books on top, and you can add those pressed flowers to the journal as well. But it's a beautiful journal that Tracy created. So if you didn't get a chance to get by the library yet, she's got these kits so that you can make your own journal at home.
And do you think, Teresa, that you could maybe press a flower in here and then tape it in here, or would you press it in another book and then tape it?
I would let it dry for a week or two in a different book, and always label your flower so you remember what it was, right? And then add it to that later, because you want to make sure it's thoroughly dry so it doesn't mold in your pollinator journal.
And then you could actually put like masking, like a packing tape over top of it in here.
That's
okay,
great.
it's dry. Okay, I love that. It's like preserving a memory of sitting in that pollinator patch and observing bees. And it's probably the most relaxing thing to do. It's just listening to the hum of the bees and sitting still for a while.
I think that's why I became an artist, and I like to go painting in the plein air and drawing, because I just love sitting and looking at the flowers. The first time I remember looking at a bee, I was sitting in my mom's flower patch, and they were buzzing around me. I was probably 2 or 3 years old.
Yeah. So we really hope that this slideshow makes you go outside and observe your pollinators, because you'll just, they're the star of every show, I think, that the BeeChicas do. It's our bees. We all love bees.
And one other little tip is that if you find asters, look up an aster if you don't know what aster plants are. And right now, those are full of pollinators. So if you want to go find some good specimens to observe, look for some asters. It's a little tip.
So, and Bill Hayes made a comment that wasps seem to love my yard. Can you talk about that balance of wasps and other pollinators?
Oh, that's a good one for Cynthia, I think. Yeah.
I'll unmute myself. My husband is mowing the lawn, so let me know if you can't. He'll come by. But you have probably something that's very attractive to wasps in your yard, and it may be your picnic dinner, because this time of year, it's when it seems like all the yellow jackets come out, and especially they seem to love chicken. So whenever I have a chicken dinner outside, the yellow jackets seem to come around, and they are looking for food and nectar right now as they desperately prepare for the end of the season. I think they can tell. And so they come here a lot.
Could it also, Cynthia, be another insect source like aphids or something? There's not that balance of predator and prey just now. There's a lot more prey, or not more, sorry, there isn't that balance maybe in your yard just yet.
Yeah, and what I might encourage you to do is create more cover for birds in your yard, because the birds will be really good at taking care of a lot of insects. And they'll take care of the larval stage of the insects, so that earlier in the year, they will eat the larval stage, and then you'll have less of a problem now. And just if you wanted to get rid of your yellow jackets, I know you've seen I don't really like these, but you see those yellow jacket traps that are pheromone traps. And if you have a really big problem right now, next year in early
March,
you should put one of those up to catch the queen yellow jackets. And if you catch the queens, then you won't have big colonies. But it's really futile to put those up now, because the queen is laying at the source in her nest. And if you kill a few workers in those pheromone traps, you're not really getting at the source. So if you really do have a serious problem, put out pheromone traps in the early spring, and you shouldn't have as bad a fall next year.
And Cynthia, speaking just to the yellow jackets, honeybees, other native bees don't go in those pheromone traps. And I actually do put them up on our property. Cynthia does not use them because she's actually seen the yellow jacket eating her Hermes scale on her oak tree. So she sees it, being beneficial and then part of her ecosystem. Whereas I see it a little differently, and mostly yellow jackets eat dead insects. They like your picnic. They live in near human populations, and they aren't good pollinators. So I don't feel bad about putting those up quite so much.
they go after the dead bees in front of our beehives. The wasps do, and do a cleanup. Has anyone noticed the northern flicker, the red shafted flicker, in their yards digging into the lawn? I think there might be, they're all over our yard, and I think they might be after the Japanese beetle grubs. Not sure.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, hopefully.
That's great.
And another tip, if you have a ton of Japanese beetles, then don't overwater your lawn in July and August, and that larva won't be able to overwinter.
Mm-hmm.
They won't be able to make it in your lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Or replace your lawn with blooming flowers.
A meadow.
Meadow. Yes.
Yeah.
Lawn is a pollinator desert. It doesn't feed anything. So when Teresa said, love your dandelions, we are serious. A lawn full of blooming dandelions is a beautiful sight, and you'll be feeding those pollinators. Somebody asked about winter plants for the bees. Well, that one gets pretty close. Dandelions are blooming in February and early March, and they're such a rich, excellent source of food for pollinators, especially when they first are emerging after a long winter and they're hungry and they've been cooped up for months. So let your dandelions bloom or replace your lawn entirely.
And I just dug up a good portion of my front lawn yesterday, and I'm going to amend the soil so it's better for native flowers with squeegee and some sand. And I'm going to plant a Resource Central garden in a box this week that I picked up.
It's going to be beautiful. And I cannot possibly add one more garden to manage and take care of. So I planted a clover lawn this year. Mm-hmm. And my front yard is entirely clover, and then spring blooming bulbs and winter aconite. So I frankly don't have to mow it. So you save on mowing, you've got blooming things in your yard, and it stays green, and I don't have to manage it. So that's another good option.
Great. And if you want to see more tips, the BeeChicas and some of our other local partners were part of the Bee Boulder Festival that happened on Saturday. And if you go to beeboulder.org and scroll down to the bottom, the video is there to watch the main stage, as well as a list of some of our partners that were involved in Pollinator Appreciation Month, and also some other projects that you can be involved with. Now, Chicas, as we wrap up, we wanted to ask you about your next workshop.
Ooh.
So we've got Honey Love on Wednesday, October 7th. And could you tell us more about that workshop?
Well, I'm going to be leading this workshop. This is Teresa, and I'm going to have a guest chef helping me in the kitchen, and that's our daughter, Hannah, who is a nutritional scientist and works at Anschutz as a dietitian. And we are going to create an amazing menu using honey in all sorts of different salad dressings and baked goods and savory dishes. So hopefully you can join us. It'll be fun.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any other final comments before we close? Oh, wait, I've got 2 questions. Sorry. We've got thank you so much for the time and sharing your knowledge. We've had several thank yous. So I'm showing this one as a way to thank you, Chicas, on screen. Thank you.
Oh, thank
Enjoyed
you.
being here.
Yeah,
That's so
it's fun.
nice.
And if you're curious about how to get to that Honey Love or any of our other events that we do with the BeeChicas, you can go to boulderlibrary.org/seed-to-table. If you would like to see the BeeChicas resources that we've been talking about during this workshop, visit BeeChicas.com and navigate around so that you can find the videos and instructions and also a lot of information about how you can support pollinators. So Chicas, thank you so much. Deborah,
Yay.
Cynthia, Teresa, and Tracy.
Yay.
Thank you for inviting us into your homes and for teaching us to make observations with creativity and an appreciation for the world around us. Thank you, Celine, for being in the background. Thank you, Boulder Library Foundation, along with everyone else who tuned in to watch and asked questions. And we have, for those of you in the audience, if you know others who'd like to would enjoy this event, remember this has been recorded and will be available to watch on the Boulder Public Library's YouTube channel. There's one specifically for Seed to Table events. Visit boulderlibrary.org, Seed to Table website for programs and Seed to Table YouTube playlist. And if you have suggestions or questions for the BeeChicas later, you can contact them through the website or through the library's website and make suggestions for other workshops to come.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you,
Have a
Kathy,
good
too.
evening. Thank you, Kat
Yeah,
and Celine.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.